Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. On today's episode, I have former state senator from Maine and the executive director of the Free State Project, Eric Brakey. Senator Brakey, thanks so much for coming on.
Happy to do it, Jonah. Thank you for the invitation.
Of course. I mentioned to you before we got started here. I had seen you do a Reason interview and had been following you on social media for a long time. So it's super huge honor for me to have you on the show. Want to start with your political background. How did you kind of get into politics? What were the main influences for you there? And talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, I guess I would say it started at the tail end of my college career. I was a senior in college in 2010, and up into that moment in time, I had been very politically interested, having grown up in a Republican household where my dad, in particular, always had Fox News on the TV and Rush Limbaugh was on the radio. And that is what I kind of thought, meant to be a conservative was what, I started tuning in like in middle school and high school, listening to Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity. And I would, I was kind of like a token Republican in my liberal suburb outside of Cleveland, Ohio. And I would argue with all my friends about politics and this and that. But, looking back on it, in truth, all I was really doing was repeating the things I heard on TV. I didn't understand it. I didn't understand the nuances of positions. It was just kind of like it just was like team sports. And
Right.
it was the red team is good, the blue team is bad, and I'm going to root for the red team. And if you're rooting for the blue team, then you're on. It was like a football match.
Right.
And I really swallowed a lot of propaganda in those days about things. This was like the era of the George W. Bush presidency. And in the immediate post 9/11 era, conservatism came to be wrapped around the idea of going to war
Mhm.
and going to war in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and picking all these fights in the Middle East. And it was always kind of tied back to this idea of, right, of course, we were attacked. They attacked us over here, so we're going to go fight them over there. Except, of course, in the hindsight of history, we realized that a lot of the people we were picking fights with were not connected to the 9/11 attacks at all. In fact, the very people who were, we would eventually go on to like support in civil wars in Syria and like put them into power. It was anyway. But at that point in time, kind of the pro-war cause was very wrapped into the Republican conservative identity, and I think that a lot of people today these days, particularly young people, might not really appreciate how uniform that was,
Mhm.
and how strong the propaganda for that was. And if you questioned the wars, you were drummed out of the party. You were not a conservative. You were not a Republican. You were
Right.
some liberal hippie who should go, smoke some pot or something. Um, and um, and that's how it was in those days. It was really, Ron Paul, who was a hero and a mentor to me.
I
He
would say
ran.
he's the greatest living American, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
he is an icon, and he is truly someone who you could put if you are in politics, I would recommend getting like one of a wristband that would say, "What would Ron Paul do?" And
Yeah.
whenever you find yourself having to make a tough choice, particularly if you're like a state legislator or something, you can look to that and ask that question, and it won't steer you wrong. But in 2008, he ran and he was kind of, painted as a gadfly. Why is this Texas congressman who had the most conservative voting record of anyone running for president, but because he didn't support the wars, right? They were said he shouldn't even be up there. He shouldn't be in the Republican Party. Like he's not a real Republican.
Mhm.
This is the real kind of neocon ascendancy in this era. And I dismissed him too in 2008. I still had, I was still locked in this mental cage where I couldn't question the propaganda I was hearing from Fox News. But it was my senior year, 2010. This was kind of the rise of the Tea Party era
Mhm.
when there started to be within the conservative movement, right? Barack Obama had just won the presidency. There was this counter conservative movement, the Tea Party, that was against the bailouts and against all the big spending, and a real kind of call to harken back to constitutional principles. And some have noted that that really seemed to kind of spin off of kind of the kernel of the message that Ron Paul had been planting in the Republican Party debates about, following the Constitution.
Right.
Well, with the Republicans out of power, they suddenly, to oppose the Democrats, that was an attractive message. Let's fight for the Constitution that will rein in the Democrats who are currently in power. And I remember it was like a week on TV. Glenn Beck was really big in those days,
Mhm.
and I remember he was kind of a central figure in the Tea Party. And I remember a week I had been reading like Ron Paul's books, The Revolution and Manifesto, which I still recommend to any person who's trying to understand, the populist libertarian movement. There was a transformative book for me. In fact, I think I've got it on the bookshelf behind me over here.
I see
Uh, it-
Provoked up there too. It's a great read.
oh yeah, yeah, a lot of good ones up there. And but I remember this week Glenn Beck had, all right, if we're gonna really tackle spending, we're gonna let's spend a day on individual areas where we can look at cutting real federal spending. And
Mhm.
he said, and we can't have any sacred cows. We've got to look at the things that, not just the things that Republicans typically say we got to cut, but we got to look at areas too, and where maybe we've been adverse to look. And
Right.
I remember he spent a day on the military spending. And I'm sure that for Glenn Beck, it was like very like minor, like, hey, we can agree that not every dollar spent on military spending is well spent. And, but even at that moment, the fact that someone on Fox News, who was a person who I respected, I looked download the new talking points into my head. uh, and the fact that he gave a little bit of mental permission to challenge this orthodoxy it was like, it was like a moment where this, I didn't even realize I'd been in a mental prison.
Mhm.
And suddenly, like, the gates swung open. Like, I had read the Ron Paul Revolution, and I thought he's right about everything about except for foreign policy. I was listening to videos by a man who's a good friend of mine now, Jack Hunter, um, who had been doing great YouTube videos on like why, if you're really a conservative and you follow these conservative principles, why you should be moving towards the Ron Paul position. After all, like, what's the real difference between the Department of Education and the Department of Defense that makes, one a wasteful government bureaucracy and the other not? Is there magical fairy dust we sprinkle over one? Of
Mhm.
course, it's the same thing. And I had just a cognitive dissonance about this that I was ignoring. I couldn't get past because all the respectable people, all the talking heads on TV told me I was not allowed to think this idea. And it was Glenn Beck who said, you know, maybe not every dollar spent on military spending is well spent. And that was enough for me to, I'm kind of ashamed to think of it now, but I think a lot of people are caught in this trap to this day, that you need permission from someone in a position of authority to have an independent thought. And from there, that was the moment I realized, like, all clicked together for me. I realized that Ron Paul was right, and I realized, and I went from, thinking, being a big supporter of these wars, to realizing with some guilt, like, that I had cheered on mass murder,
Mhm.
and that people in power who I had put my trust in had lied to us and had preyed upon our virtues as Americans, our patriotism, our desire to defend our country and defend our people and to defend freedom. They preyed upon these virtues to sell us on committing mass murder against innocent people. And that is something that ever since I have never been able to forgive them for. And that's why kind of the anti-war cause has been kind of one of my most animating um, reasons for being so political these last what would it be? That was 2010, so these last 15 years. So I went from having that epiphany, graduating college. I didn't know what to do with all of that. I was but I wanted to do something. I moved to New York City. I had a BFA in acting, and so I was working as a professional actor in New York City, and I got involved with the grassroots Ron Paul effort there. That ended up leading to a job with the Ron Paul campaign where I went to Maine, where my family roots go back for about 10 generations. Became the state director for the campaign there. We ended up winning the delegates to the national convention and taking over the state Republican Party. There was a whole showdown at the RNC that year, which is one for the history books for any who do want to know about that. Um, and I just kept asking myself every step along the way as I found myself in positions to play a significant role in, that other people didn't have the opportunity to. It felt like it'd be selfish to walk away to play a role in the advancement of the cause of liberty. So I ended up running for state senate 2 years later. I took out a Democrat incumbent, served 3 terms, passed a number of good bills, ran for federal office twice, but ultimately realized that as time went on, um, so many of the battles for liberty, even the ones we had won in the state of Maine, and I think this is true in many states around the country. Even when you win a single battle, like I'm proud of passing constitutional carry in the state of Maine and expanding medical cannabis and getting the first right to try law in New England. I'm proud of all these things, but I also saw that around all of these singular victories were so many areas where liberty was dying a death by a thousand cuts.
Right.
I couldn't do it alone, and there just wasn't enough of a liberty network at this point as people from the Ron Paul Revolution gradually kind of drop off and go have families and move to different places. I couldn't do it alone. And so when the opportunity arose to go to New Hampshire and to lead the Free State Project, I did some soul searching and decided that this was the place I could be the most effective because it is built on a concentration strategy. The idea that there are liberty lovers all around the country, millions, but we are so dispersed among the general populace that we can't really have a significant impact on the
Mm.
politics and the culture of where we are. But if
Right.
we can gather a good chunk of that remnant together in one place, like a small state with a pre-existing libertarian ethic, like the Live Free or Die state of New Hampshire, then over time, it is not liberty that is dying a death by a thousand cuts. It is statism that is dying a death by a thousand cuts because you have so many people working at so many different issues in so many different places in a decentralized manner that it is it's a gradual decentralized revolution, and that's what's taking place in New Hampshire now. It's the number one state for freedom in America, and as more and more liberty lovers join us here and make the move to New Hampshire, that cause gets only stronger.
Awesome. And I want to talk more about the Free State Project a little bit later on, but I want to kind of dial it into libertarianism. You kind of talked about your upbringing, Fox News, you kind of were conservative or Republican back in that day. What really drew you? I know you talked about Ron Paul and kind of the war to libertarianism, but I want you to talk more about that. What is libertarianism? Can you define it for
Yeah.
my audience and break it down a little bit? What differentiates libertarianism from like Republicans and Democrats?
Well, I couldn't even tell you what it means to be a Republican or what it means to be a Democrat. At one point in time, I mean, these were philosophies, right? These parties
Mm.
were named after philosophies.
Right.
You know, there is a such thing as small r republicanism and small d democracy, but that's not necessarily the values that these parties stand for anymore. They kind of took these labels and they have hollowed them out to mean whatever the hell they want to mean, which tends to mean just standing up for the interests of their own batch of special interest groups. There's no underlying coherent philosophy that underlies the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. I
Yeah.
mean, why is it in particular that um, you're supposed to be, anti-abortion and pro-death penalty? Like I mean, people can argue it, but there's contradictions there, or there's an even bigger contradiction, right? In being pro-war and
Right.
anti-abortion, you can't call yourself pro-life and be pro-war, pro-murdering innocent people around the world. Well, there are these contradictions, and you could pick out so many contradictions on the Democratic side of the aisle too, of course. There is no underlying philosophy. It's just a basket of issues.
Mhm.
Um,
Okay.
and and I could make similar criticisms of the Libertarian Party. I think that, I've been criticized before for calling myself a small L libertarian because people say, "Well, you're not a registered member of the Libertarian Party." It's like, well, I thought you guys claimed to be the party of principle, not just like, a party like any other. Just you got to be loyal to this party apparatus.
Right.
Um, but libertarianism is basically, at its core, a very simple idea that um, that I have the right to my own life, to my own liberty, to my own property. I can do with that whatever I want, so long as I'm not infringing on the same rights of others. It is, in its essence, it is an idea of reciprocity. I always like Ron Paul always said, it's basically the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. If I have these rights, then you have these rights. All of and it's Thomas Jefferson, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or John Locke, life, liberty, and property. That is libertarianism at its core. And one point of caution I would give to particularly young people who are exploring the libertarian political philosophy is that it is not in itself a complete philosophy for life. It
Mhm.
is just rules of the road for how we live in a peaceful society. And I know a lot of young people, and I myself have done it at times, like have made a little bit of maybe a cult of libertarianism, uh, you know, but it's not really capable of that. I think Ayn Rand actually had a very fair critique of libertarianism at one point. She said it's not a complete philosophy, and that's why she proposed objectivism, which was her idea of a complete philosophy, which is certainly built upon libertarian principles, but she then adds a more positive philosophy to go on top of it. I don't agree with her positive philosophy. There's a lot of things I could critique about it. But what I would say is you can be a libertarian and you can be a Christian or an atheist or any religion or philosophy that gives you a positive orientation for how you live your life, not just what not to do to other people. So
Right.
it's just libertarian. It's just baseline stuff. Don't hurt people. Don't take their stuff.
The non-aggression principle.
Absolutely.
So I want to ask you then a little bit about the Libertarian Party in this country, the third largest political party. They have a really tough time kind of gaining traction in different states. Why do you think that is? And also, side note, I feel like when people think of libertarians, there's a libertarian idea of like, open borders, maximum freedom, something like license plates are tyranny. And then there's more of maybe a principled libertarian where I think of like a Dave Smith, maybe like a Ron Paul. Um, can you give me your thoughts on that and kind of just talk a little bit about the political party and why they're having so much trouble kind of gaining traction?
Well, I think they're having trouble gaining traction just because inherently how our political system is designed. I mean, putting aside any kind of problems or disagreements that people have inside the Libertarian Party, of course, which there are plenty, um, you can be the third largest party in America, but as long as you are in a two-party system, you might as well be the fifth largest party in America or the 10th largest party in America.
Right.
This system is not designed for more than two parties. And that's because we have a plurality-based first past the post system that in which human nature is such that when you get closer and closer to election day, you boil down your choices to the two people most likely to win.
Hmm.
And people are more likely to vote against the person they fear the most than for the person they love the most if they don't think that that person has a path to victory. So that's human nature, and that's how our system is designed. And so if you really want to advance libertarian ideas within the system as it's currently designed, I think you really have to play a role in the primaries of the two major parties.
Right.
That's where the real action is to advance these things by getting people like Thomas Massey the Republican nomination in these in winnable districts.
Absolutely.
That's where, if you really want to win, that's where the game has to be played. And sadly, I think that a lot of LP members, they will say, well, it's not fair that we have a two-party system. And I agree that it's not fair, but you don't really have a viable plan to change that.
Right.
you could argue that the laws need to be changed, but how are you going to change the laws if you never win any elections?
Absolutely. And I think too that's a great point. I saw a post the other day that someone said something like libertarians should just hijack the Republican Party and start running as Republicans, kind of like socialists did with Democrats. And
That's
I
what the
think that that's a
neoconservatives did.
way right, exactly. And that's a way better option than trying to, at least right now, than trying to build up like a really viable third party option. Because it's just you, like you said, the system's rigged against it, and also Democrats, Republicans, they're not letting it happen. I mean, we saw in the last election, right? Bobby Kennedy Jr. had some good traction, but he was spending so much of his time trying to get on these ballots in states. They're suing him. Like there were all these roadblocks for him. So it's a really difficult process. So I kind of like what you said there. And interested to know, what do you think that the future of the Libertarian Party is? Do you think that they should kind of just play a role of kind of not kingmaker, but also have a say in primaries like they kind of did in the last election, right? The chair kind of played a role in getting libertarians to vote for Trump if he decided to free Ross Ulbricht. Or do you think that they should really push in the long term to be a third party option?
Yeah. I mean, I will say, regardless what you think of Angela McArdle, and full disclosure, she is a friend of mine.
Yep.
Um, so putting aside, because I know there's controversies and stuff, and so, but putting however people feel about her personally, the strategy that she put forward is probably, I mean, I would say the most effective strategy for the Libertarian Party that I've seen put forward to date, because it's not based on the illusion that that the LP is going to start winning, federal races overnight. That if we just maintain our ballot access, then suddenly people will wake up and
Right.
they'll start ignoring their human instincts to vote for the lesser of two evils,
Hmm.
and they'll suddenly say we're going to vote for the person we like the most. It just um that has not been a winning strategy. In fact, that's why the Free State Project was formed, but that's a whole other story. Um, but the idea that you embrace the fact that the leverage you do have is to be the spoiler candidate,
Right.
to sabotage the major party candidate who is more closely aligned with you, who you take more votes away from, and use that leverage to extract concessions from that candidate, as was done this year with the pardon of Ross Ulbricht, and with other various promises. Some were kept, some were not. Um, that is the leverage that a third party has, the leverage of being the spoiler. And you can do a lot with that if you
Absolutely.
actually embrace that role. But if your goal is to actually win elections, you got to have a presence in one of the two major parties.
Hmm.
And I will say that as far as the Democratic Party goes, it seems that their immune system is much stronger against libertarianism than the Republican Party's immune system. We have been
Definitely.
able to, particularly over the course of the last 20 years, or so, since the Ron Paul campaign, really establish a liberty wing of the Republican Party. And I think that we should be continuing to grow and expand that.
For sure. And I really like how you kind of put that there playing spoiler. I think that that's what happened in the last election. And the only hope for libertarians is keep pushing the envelope, right? Like keep demanding more things as we go along. I think that, though, too, I don't know if you feel the same way. There's definitely a shift amongst young conservatives to be more on like libertarian ideas. I think Thomas Massey's incredibly popular within Congress. I don't think it's out of the question that at some point he could be a solid Republican candidate to be president. And to me, he's essentially a libertarian. Do you
Oh
agree
yeah.
with that?
Oh yeah. I've asked him to run for president before. I don't know if he's thinking about it more these days, but I just know when I asked him, he looked at me like I'd asked him to drown a bag of puppies. so,
Well, hopefully he'll
so
run one day, and we have
I,
Rand
I,
Paul's in the
yeah,
Senate. I think someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene is really a Trumpy MAGA person, but at the same time, I think
she's gotten a lot better.
She exactly. She has really shifted her views on war, on government spending, on big government, right? So I think that there is kind of a movement within the MAGA movement that's shifting more towards the actually conservative libertarian Thomas Massey style.
Yeah, and I think that those who, I think those in the Libertarian Party who reject the idea of, forming these kinds of coalitions. I mean, I get it if they I know some people, they would just rather form a different coalition. They would rather form a coalition with, the progressive left. Okay,
Right.
we can have a debate about that. But if you reject the idea of forming coalitions entirely with people who don't agree with you on everything, then you're always going to be politically marginalized. The only alternate strategy to win, other than coalition building, is political concentration like we're doing in New Hampshire.
Mhm.
So if you're not doing one of those two things, if you're not concentrating your voting power in one place, and you're unwilling to work with people who you agree with on maybe 60-70% of things on those things, if you're not then you're just going to always be on the outside throwing stones. And I think that a lot of people are really comfortable there. It's easy to be on the outside throwing stones because the
Right.
moment you win something, then you're accountable for what comes next. And
Yep.
if you never win anything, then you can always be the person saying, "I told you so."
Right. 100%. I totally agree with that. I kind of want to ask you a little bit about your political career. State senator for Maine. You also were the Republican nominee for the U.S. Senate. You were a Republican, but you talk a lot about libertarian ideas. Why did you decide to run as a Republican? I mean, I'm sure it's going to go a lot back to what you kind of just said about just being on one side or the other. But also, do you think that there's ever a scenario where people can run as libertarians for like local government, state government, and kind of build their way out there?
Of course, I ran as a I mean, I've been a lifelong Republican, but of course, I've told you, I think it's just a label. It doesn't inherently mean anything. So I don't even know that the label conservative means anything. Tell me what you want to conserve,
Right.
first, and then we can have a discussion. Um, but I ran as a Republican because strategically, it was the way to win. Um, and the Republican voters that I was seeking to represent agreed with me on a lot of things.
Mhm.
There were things we didn't agree on, but I know in Maine, I was one of the most popular Republicans in the legislature among the Republican base, and I was a libertarian. And I
Mhm.
was popular because I championed a lot of issues that they cared about harder than the maybe the generic, not really ideologically motivated Republicans did. I championed and passed constitutional carry and restored people's gun rights. I championed welfare reforms that brought accountability to some of these programs in ways that other people were not willing to rock the boat because their priority is just getting reelected, not actually advancing an idea. So when they disagreed with me on things like cannabis, um, they oftentimes just said, "Well, that's Eric Brakey. He's the
Right.
guy who got us our guns back, so, we'll let it slide there." And then on a lot of other issues, like, because of the credibility I built up with the conservative base in Maine, I was able to actually bring a lot of people in our direction who might not otherwise, have been there on a whole host of issues, from Fourth Amendment privacy rights and I was even able to open a lot of people's minds on drug policy and cannabis. So, um, but people are fundamentally tribal in nature, and people aren't going to listen to you if they don't think you're in their tribe and on their team.
Right.
That's a sad fact of human nature. So you gotta be able to speak to people where they are. And as far as I think you asked about, people running as libertarians and getting elected locally. I've heard of cases where that has been very effective, and I think kind of but the value in a lot of these local races is that they're not partisan, so
Right.
the party label doesn't appear on the ballot, so people aren't necessarily defaulting to the R or the D, and so
Yeah,
that gives an opportunity for independents and libertarians, and I'm sure someone could be in the Green Party and have a better chance of getting elected locally than they might in a partisan race.
for sure.
And it certainly is helpful to have that built-in name recognition and a record if you want to run for higher office. But you're still going to run into that problem, which is that if you take the generic district in a partisan race, there's 30% that are going to vote for Team D no matter what. There's 30% who are going to vote for Team R no matter what.
Mhm.
And that basically leaves you in a position if you're not going into the race with one of those pre-established bases of support, you have to basically get every other single vote out there that is unaccounted for.
Right.
They're starting at 30% and you're starting at 0%. They've got a huge lead on you. It's just strategically so much smarter to pick one of the two major parties and win the nomination there.
Absolutely. Um, I totally agree, and that's what I think. We go back to what we just said. I think it's best for libertarians to start just running as Republicans, and start to gain some traction there. I mean, the two-party system is here to stay. Like it's like going to be next to impossible to break it. You're better off to kind of go another way and try to get into power that way by running as something like a Republican. So we kind of talked about your political career in Maine. I want to shift now to you living in New Hampshire. Like I mentioned, executive director of the Free State Project. Talk to me a little bit about what led you to New Hampshire, what led you to take on this new role, and talk to me about the Free State Project. What is it?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll start with the Free State Project itself. It's been around for 22 years now. It was founded as an explicit rejection of the National Libertarian Party strategy. At
Hmm.
this point, the Libertarian Party had been around for 30 years and had accomplished nothing, not won a single race in 3 decades. And our founder, Jason Sorens, had the idea, what if there's a better strategy, recognizing there are millions of libertarians around the country, but we're existing kind of like a diaspora. We're not really concentrated in any particular place where we can have a significant impact on the politics and the culture. What if we picked a small state, a state with an already kind of strong libertarian culture and ethic, and we got 20,000 libertarians to move there? Then what would happen? And over the course of the last 22 years, we haven't gotten to 20,000 yet. We did have 20,000 people who signed a pledge and to move within 5 years of triggering the move, and the move was triggered in 2016. Um, our numbers, I wish I could say our numbers were totally accurate, but I want to. One of my goals for next year is try to do a free state census and try to get a better counting of our numbers. But the estimates are about 5 to 8,000 people actually have followed through and made that move. Um, and as a result, over the course of the last 2 decades, so like a full generation of this, libertarians, largely running and getting elected as Republicans, are now a quarter of the state legislature with almost 100 seats between the House and the Senate. New Hampshire is ranked the #1 state for freedom in America. We continue advancing the ball on a whole host of libertarian ideas that for the longest time have only existed in, conversation and white papers. We are able to bring it into reality in New Hampshire, whether that's like the school choice ideas of Milton Friedman, whether it's tax abolition. We just put the final nails in the coffin of the personal income tax in New Hampshire with the elimination of the interest and dividends tax. Um, we are we just passed a new law for like free market electricity, which is, I mean, kind of revolutionary and groundbreaking if you like know anything about how tightly regulated energy policy is state by state in this country. Now, someone can, if you aren't tying into the overall public grid, you can basically uh, build your own electricity generation, and it is completely unregulated by the utility regulators. This is great for, especially as we're kind of at the advent of AI and cryptocurrency mining. Like, this is kind of setting New Hampshire up to be kind of at the forefront of these ideas. We're the first state with a state Bitcoin reserve, a whole host of things. And it's because we have liberty lovers who've moved to New Hampshire. Many have got involved in direct politics. Many ran for office themselves. The current House Republican majority leader is someone who moved here for the Free State Project, someone who's like a fan of Murray Rothbard and could talk to you about Austrian economics for hours. I mean, where do you find this in any other state in
Right.
this country? So on the political side, that's been the result. And I know you. I love to just say this one thing, but I think something that's even more valuable than the politics. It's easy to like tout all the political wins.
Hmm.
What's even more valuable is the community that's been built here. People are building homeschool co-ops. This is this is the cradle of Bitcoin. We're the earliest adopters of Bitcoin when it was just an idea, recognized like this is a way to challenge the Federal Reserve banking system and really, create a lot of the use cases for it and help nurture it into the multi-billion-dollar asset it is today. Like this is the place for libertarian innovators if you want to take these ideas out of theory, put them in reality, and actually demonstrate that they work, they lead to peace and prosperity. You should, rather than losing where you are, you should come to New Hampshire and win and prove that liberty works.
Awesome. I love that. And I'm curious to know like, a lot of follow-up questions to that. How did you land on New Hampshire? And I don't know if you missed this. Did you guys decide like on a particular city in New Hampshire to move to? How was that decision made? And where are you? Like, where are you exactly in the state of New Hampshire?
Yeah, I will say there's no like singular city or singular region of New Hampshire. People just move to New Hampshire, and because people move to all different regions, where there are free state communities all over the state. And they kind of sometimes have their own kind of slant and for example, like the Free Staters of Keene, New Hampshire, have a particular reputation that is very different than the Free Staters of the North Country,
Mhm.
um, uh, and other regions. So, um, but New Hampshire was selected for a number of reasons, and the process was that the early signers of the Free State Pledge uh, did a vote.
Got
There was a whole kind of selection process. They narrowed it down to 10 states and had a vote on what state that the Free State Project would land in. There was a big push by a lot of the native libertarians in New Hampshire for New Hampshire to be selected. I think they saw the real opportunity of, if we could bring in more libertarians, we could actually have the kind of society that we want to live in, which is really just restoring the live free or die spirit that's been here in New Hampshire since the American Revolution. Um, but New Hampshire was selected for a number of reasons. I will say the runner-up state, and there's sometimes people give me some grief about this, and like I wasn't there for it. I'm a Johnny come lately to this thing. If it was up to me, I would have chosen Maine. But New Hampshire was selected, one, because of the strong libertarian culture that was already there. Two, it's a small population state.
it.
So if you were to choose a state like Texas, for example, 20,000 people is a drop in the bucket.
Right.
Or really a drop in the ocean. Like you're not gonna moving 20,000 people to Texas is not going to make a difference on the overall politics and culture of the state. Move 20,000 people to a small state like New Hampshire, where we're like 1.3 million people. We've just got just 2 congressional districts. That really starts to shift things.
Hmm.
Um,
Well,
the
that's why I was
runner-up.
going to ask if New York was ever on the list, but you kind of answered that question.
No, no, no. Well, New York is certainly too big a population, and there's no inherent libertarian culture in the Empire State.
Right.
It's why it's
I wish.
ranked dead last on the Freedom in the 50 States Index. Um, the runner-up state, though, and it was desirable in a lot of ways. I understand why runner-up was Wyoming. And Wyoming is a great state. There's a lot of great people. My understanding is the Liberty Movement's doing very well there, and they've got a lot of good people elected to their legislature. They've also been pioneers on cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. I
Mhm.
think that there's a certain kinship between the Liberty Movements of Wyoming and New Hampshire. But I think what was ultimately one of the big values of New Hampshire over Wyoming was that it's not just um, populationally small, it is also geographically small.
Right.
So you can actually form real in-person community here in a way that I think when people are so spread out, it's harder to do. And this was not a particular part of the selection process at the time, but has been a real after the fact, people realize like this actually was perfect and a real value add for New Hampshire, is that the state House of Representatives in New Hampshire it's the second biggest legislative body in the world. It's got 400 members, which means like almost like every neighborhood has its own state representative, which means it's very accessible.
Mhm.
And it's been particularly the last 5 years, Free Staters and the Free State movement has been very successful in getting people elected to the state house, to where we now control a quarter of the body.
Awesome. And I'm a big believer in Bitcoin. You kind of talked on Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and how it's being utilized in the state of New Hampshire. I want you to kind of talk a little bit about that. Like, are people using it to pay for goods at a store? How does that work? And kind of what's the development of Bitcoin right now and what's it look like moving forward?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of support for it. I will say that I think, like a lot of places, utilization in kind of day-to-day transactions has actually dropped over time. I mean, New Hampshire used to have, you could, I think, more stores per capita than anywhere else in the country where
Mm,
you could use Bitcoin. Um, if I were to try to explain it, I think that what has happened is this is before the federal government came in and started cracking down and making it very, very difficult. So there are a lot of kind of regular mom and pops that were taking Bitcoin that aren't really so much anymore. Hopefully, that's something that will be kind of restored over time as Bitcoin becomes more and more popular. But of course, I think one of the challenges for Bitcoin as a medium of exchange right now is just that. Um, it is still pretty volatile, and
right.
so it is still at the phase where people are looking at it as an investment and what its future utility is, rather than, and there's the old, principle in economics that good money chases out bad.
Mhm.
So, people would rather hold on to their Bitcoin just like they would rather hold on to gold or silver than and spend their dollars because the
Right.
dollars are losing value, so you wanna get rid of that stuff, and, you're inclined to wanna hold on to things. Now, that probably means in the long run, the dollar is as it continues losing value, like other currencies that have been inflationary, you wonder how long for the world it is. But, anyway, so we'll see. We'll see what happens there. But,
Well, I hope sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
go on.
I hope that Bitcoin eventually becomes more of a, medium of exchange on day-to-day services, goods that people are purchasing, but at the same time, I feel like the libertarian idea of, sound money, you mentioned Murray Rothbard, Bitcoin really fits that mold, so it's not a surprise to me that many people are buying it, holding it as an asset in the state of New Hampshire.
Yeah. We certainly encourage all those people who are buying and holding it to, make a tax-deductible donation with it to the Free State Project because we certainly we certainly accept Bitcoin, and some of our biggest, donors, donate with Bitcoin, and certainly, at the Porcupine Freedom Festival this year, like, all of our top sponsors were, paying for their sponsorships with various forms of cryptocurrency.
Awesome. I love to hear that. I wanna ask you now, I read a book a while ago called "A Libertarian Walks Into a Bear." Have you ever heard of the book?
I've heard of it, I haven't read it.
Well, it's based about, a libertarian town in Grafton, New Hampshire. So and essentially, I feel like it was a while ago that I read it, but it made me think of New Hampshire when we were having this
Yeah.
conversation. And essentially, what they tried to do was say that, the whole idea of libertarianism kind of doesn't work because they were having, there were no public services. They were having trouble getting, firemen to come in if there was ever a fire. And the whole idea was like there were bears wandering around. They didn't have public service to kind of take care of wildlife. Um, do you, like, agree with that? Kinda what would be your rebuttal to, like, an argument like that? That you need those public services, that's why a libertarian town can't
Yeah.
work.
Yeah, my understanding is that book is basically based on a myth,
Okay,
and my understanding is that many of the wildlife experts in New Hampshire have noted that there was actually no increase in the bear population during that period of time,
okay.
and it's just kind of like a fun story that progressives have peddled that's kind of run away with itself. Um, I would tell you what really happens when a libertarian walks into a bear is we have a bear roast, and that's how you take care of a bear population that is out of control. Is you allow people to hunt them. So. Um, and yeah, I mean, and I will say kind of but to the broader question about like local services, I'm open to the idea that uh um you know that when it comes to kind of local government, I think that Thomas Jefferson is the one who said that local government is the only place where democracy really works, where the individual person has the greatest share of voice in the decisions that are made.
Right.
So I'm not running out there to say, we got to defund all local services. I frankly, I think that's probably the better place to do some of these things than certainly on the state or national level. But I also think that we should be open to experimenting with a lot of these local services. What really needs to be run by the government, and what could be handled better through voluntary market interactions. I mean, one pet peeve of mine is that you have like the way you have like a garbage pickup in a lot of places. You basically have like a local government imposed monopoly that gives a contract to a particular business to handle it,
Mhm.
when if you could just unleash the entrepreneurial spirit and let people start their own different like garbage pickup services,
Right, it'd
and
be like
people would
snowplowing.
pay for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it would be like a snowplowing service. But what you're saying is like my exact argument for like the federal government. I think that public services work better at a local level because that local community knows how best to allocate resources, capital to achieve the goals of their community. It is crazy to think that a bureaucrat politician from the state of Washington knows what's best for the local people of Florida. Like that to me is kind of a crazy thought process.
Yeah, I often think about someone had said, I don't remember who said it. Someone said, on the this is not a free stater, and don't necessarily endorse this statement. I just think it illustrates an interesting point, right? On the uh, on the national level, I'm a libertarian. On the state level, I'm a Republican. On the local level, I'm a Democrat. On the family level, I'm a communist.
Yep.
um, I can appreciate that from the sense of like decentralization, and of course, like I think probably a good family is run a little bit like a commune or a socialist system, right?
Mhm.
That's what family is, right? Um, but as you kind of expand outward from there, it doesn't mean that something that might work on a really micro level uh, works as you expand it outward and outward. In fact, there's a great book by Andrew Heaton. I don't know if you know Andrew Heaton, but he's creates a lot of funny videos at Reason, and he's got a great podcast called The Political Orphanage. I recommend it. And he's become a good friend over the years. He's got a great book called Tribalism is Dumb that really explores um, the how we as human beings evolved in tribes and how we are wired for tribalism, and how there's this really interesting concept in it called Dunbar's number, which is the maximum number of people that can naturally exist in a group before we start to need name tags.
Mhm.
And that number is something like 153. After a group expands beyond, so let's just round it, say 150. Um, After a group expands beyond 150, people start to become abstractions and not individuals in our minds.
Right.
And so this is where societies start to break down and companies break down and teams break down if you start to get beyond this number. And so theoretically, like, if you were to try a socialist experiment, it could theoretically kind of work in a group of no more than 150 where people feel all a sense of, um, obligation to each other. Your neighbor. If there's like, he uses the example like, um, certain if there were, I don't remember where this was like, but a place where people had like a community where people had like, like a fund that you could, hey, if you just had some extra money you want to put in the community fund,
Mhm.
um and anyone could take out of it for any reason if they were just falling on some hardship and they needed a little bit extra support, no questions asked. And that could work in like a really small community where
Right.
people feel like, oh, if I'm taking this money, I better really need it because I know Steve, and Steve put this money in there. But when you expand that out to like a massive welfare state, where it's just anonymous and depersonalized, and you don't have any sense of the person who earned this money, who you're taking it from, then it just becomes rife for just the tragedy of the commons. Like, let me take everything I can possibly get because otherwise someone else is going to take it, and
Mhm.
and things break down. So. Um, yeah, anyway, I don't remember how we got on this topic, but I think it's a fascinating understanding for why for why a lot of these socialist ideas may sound nice in theory or may even work on very small scales, but you can't scale it up. And
Right.
this is the problem with, so many of these socialists who want to impose like national health care and national socialist schemes. You can't conceivably do something like this on the scale of hundreds of millions of people.
Yeah, exactly. I agree completely. We were talking about how it's kind of crazy that like the federal government in Washington D.C. knows how to best spend money for people in a local community in Maine or Wyoming or whatever it may be. So that's kind of how we got talking about it. But you kind of hit the nail on the head there. I totally agree with that. And also, I want to check out that book. That's kind of the last question I wanted to ask you. But one question I want to say, I want to know what the long term goal in your mind is for the Free State Project. Where do you see it in 5 years? Where do you see it in 10 years? And also then too, how can younger people get involved? How can older people get involved?
Yeah. So for the Free State Project, I want to keep building our communities, growing our numbers, and building the freest society on earth.
Do you have a goal in mind, a number goal in mind?
Well, I don't want to stop anywhere. I mean, I'd love to get to the 20,000. That was the original goal. We have a lot of work to do to get there. But I want to accelerate the migration that's been taking place these last 20 years, and also build strong ties with people in the state who share our values. Um, the way that we do that, I think of it in five phases. So five phases of things that we do, and five phases that people we're trying to work with do.
Hmm.
We want to promote to the liberty diaspora, all the people who love liberty around this country and around the world, to be aware of what's being built in New Hampshire, the unique nature of this project, so that people. So we promote so they can learn,
Hmm.
and that's what doing podcasts like this is. This is promoting to the liberty diaspora, spread all over. Then we want to connect. We want to outreach and connect with people. So for your audience, the best thing you could do to connect with us is to go to our website, fsp.org, and sign up for the weekly email newsletter that I write with the support of my team every single week. It is the most optimistic libertarian newsletter you will ever read because every single week we've got wins to tout.
Hmm.
Where else are you reading about libertarian wins? Only here in New Hampshire. So connect with us, sign up for the newsletter, and you can follow us on social media on Facebook and X and Instagram and TikTok. My comms director has me doing a lot of TikTok videos. I've never done that before, but I guess some of them are getting pretty popular. Um, then phase three, we want to invite you to come and visit. That's why we put on events year round. Our biggest events, of course, are known around the world. There's the Porcupine Freedom Festival every single summer. We're still right now in the process of trying to pin down some details with a venue for that next year. We hope to have an announcement shortly on that. We also have the New Hampshire Liberty Forum, which will be in early March. We'll be announcing more details on that shortly as well. And we have a lot of smaller events throughout the year that we are personally putting on and promoting. Um, but we also have really micro community events. You could go to our website, fsp.org, and look at our community calendar. You will see that there are events literally taking place, put on by members of the Free State community almost every single day. You won't find that in any other state, whether it's meetups or hiking groups or, libertarian knit and bitch, whatever it is, like, you know, there is stuff that people are building for liberty lovers around almost any single interest that you might have. And if it doesn't exist yet, you could come here and build it.
Awesome.
We have the human capital for that. So that's phase three. We want to invite you to come and visit. And once you've visited, once you have seen what is actually being built here, because seeing is believing, then my hope is that you will sell yourself on the idea that you need to be here, you need to be a part of it. And so we want to welcome you as you make the move. And if you decide you want to make the move, you let us know on the website. We can connect you with someone in our what we call our Porcupine Pal program. It's like a pen pal, but porcupine is our symbol. They always they're always open carrying and they're peaceful. Just don't mess with them. You can get connected with a Free Stater who's here on the ground who will be a porcupine pal for you. you can who will, be a point of contact, can help you as you plan, prepare, and execute your move. That can be pointing you in the direction of resources for finding housing, finding employment opportunities, or just answering basic questions about what it's like to make the move and to get settled here. And then once you arrive, we do a great welcome wagon for folks. You'll have like a dozen friendly Free Staters there to help you unpack your moving truck into your new home, and and give you resources to help you get engaged with the community. Because that's the final phase. Once you've made the move, we want to keep you engaged so that you are in the process of building the Free State. Whether that's building through the direct political path, like people running for office, or supporting those who are, or legislative lobbying, or other paths like building up homeschooling networks, or building up cryptocurrencies, or agorism. Whatever your interest is, whatever you want to build, there are communities here we want you to engage with to build them. So that's the 5-phase pipeline. So I'd love to have Jonah. I invite you to come and visit if you haven't been to our events. I think you definitely should come to PorcFest or Liberty Forum, or one of our other events. But people can come year round. There's stuff going on all the time.
I'm definitely going to come to an event. I think that would be great. Also, side note, I'm going to leave the link to your website in my description, along with all your socials for everyone to check out as well. So people, make sure you check out the website, subscribe to the newsletter.
Yes, that's
Last
the
thing
easiest thing. Subscribe to the newsletter. That's the first step.
subscribe to the newsletter. And then, Senator, last thing I have for you here, I just want you to give me 3 book recommendations for my audience to learn a little bit more about libertarianism, freedom. What are 3 books that you would recommend, or that maybe have influenced you? I know you already mentioned one, Tribalism is Dumb, but do you have a few other recommendations?
Yeah, well, I think the other book I also mentioned, which is a great place to start if you haven't read it, is Ron Paul's The Revolution and Manifesto. That's the book that changed my whole political outlook. So that's a great place to start. Tribalism is Done by Andrew Heaton is a great one too. Um, and a great one for understanding the economics of all this. Really great, simple one is one a lot of people have probably heard of, but that's Economics in One Lesson by uh, Hazlitt, Henry Hazlitt.
Okay.
And those at least Ron Paul's The Revolution and Economics in One Lesson were very formative for me. And Tribalism is Dumb is just a fascinating book.
Awesome. I'm going to also put links to those in the description as well. But Senator Brakey, this was awesome. I really appreciate you giving me some time here, and I hope we can connect down the line.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jonah.